The courtroom was cold in the way that old buildings get cold in November, not just from the weather outside, but from something deeper, something that had settled into the walls over decades of hard verdicts and harder silences. The fluorescent lights hummed above 12 jurors who had stopped looking at the defendant sometime around the second day of testimony. When people stopped looking at you, it usually meant they had already made up their minds. Marcus Carter sat with his back straight and his hands flat on the defense table. 57 years old, broad-shouldered, wearing a suit that did not quite fit, borrowed from a neighbor who was 2 sizes smaller. His court-appointed attorney, a young man named Preston who sweated through every cross-examination, was shuffling papers beside him with the quiet desperation of someone who knew the math was not working out. The prosecutor was wrapping up her closing statement. She was good. She laid it out cleanly. Motive, opportunity, physical evidence, and a witness who had seen Marcus's truck leaving the scene. She described Marcus as a man who had spent a lifetime on the margins of this town, nursing a grievance that finally boiled over. She used the word isolated 3 times. She used the word dangerous twice. She did not use the word innocent at all, because that was not her job. Marcus listened without expression. He had learned a long time ago that showing pain in public only gave people something to use against you. The prosecutor closed her folder. "The people rest, Your Honor." Judge Harlan nodded and began addressing the jury. His voice filled the room with the measured cadence of a man who had presided over too many of these moments to feel the weight of them anymore. Marcus looked at the wall behind the jury box. Pale yellow paint, a long crack running from the window frame toward the ceiling. He had been staring at that crack for 3 days. He thought about the garage. He thought about whether he had remembered to lock the side door before they took him. He thought about a cot in the back room, a coffee maker with a broken warming plate, a pegboard hung with wrenches in order of size. He thought about the things a person thinks about when they are trying very hard not to think about what is actually happening. The door at the back of the courtroom opened. It was not a dramatic entrance. There was no pause in the proceedings, no gasp from the gallery. 2 people simply walked in and took seats in the second row, a young man in a dark suit carrying a thick leather case, and a young woman with a tablet tucked under one arm and a folder of documents pressed against her chest. Marcus heard the door. He did not turn around immediately. Then some pull he could not explain, made him look. The young man was about 29, lean, with close-cut hair and the focused stillness that comes from years of learning to read a room quickly. The young woman beside him was 27, her jaw set, her eyes moving over the courtroom with the practiced assessment of someone who had walked into many places where she was not entirely welcome. Marcus looked at them for a long moment. His hands, still flat on the table, pressed down harder against the wood. They were not his blood. They shared no DNA with him, no legal name, nothing that a record search would connect to Marcus Carter of Clanton, Alabama. What they shared with him was something that did not show up in any database. A garage on Mercer Road, a rainy night in November 21 years ago, and a promise that Marcus had never once spoken aloud, but had kept every single day since. Noah, Lily. He turned back to face the front of the courtroom. His eyes were dry. He was 57 years old, and he had learned how to keep his eyes dry. But the line of his jaw had changed, and Preston, glancing sideways at him, noticed it without understanding what it meant. The judge was still speaking. The words moved around Marcus without quite landing. "They came," he thought. "I told them not to. I specifically told them not to." He almost smiled. 21 years earlier, Marcus Carter had been 36, recently widowed in the way that leaves no clean edges, not a slow illness that gives you time to prepare, not something you can frame as peaceful. His wife, Denise, and their 2-year-old son, James, had been killed on a Friday evening by a driver who had been drinking since noon. Marcus had been at the garage, working a double shift to cover the rent they were 2 weeks behind on. He found out from a police officer who came to the garage at 11:15 and asked if he was Marcus Carter before telling him anything else. For 3 years after that, Marcus did what a lot of men do when the mechanism that makes life feel worth continuing gets knocked out of place. He kept working. He kept paying his bills. He stopped answering his phone unless it was a customer. He moved a cot into the back of the garage and stopped going home. because home was an apartment with a crib still set up in the second bedroom, and a half-finished can of baby formula on the kitchen counter that he could not bring himself to throw away and could not bring himself to look at. He was not falling apart. He was doing something more dangerous than that. He was holding together so completely that nothing, good or bad, could get through anymore. The night he found Noah and Lily, it was the second week of November. A cold front had pushed down from Tennessee and the rain was coming in sideways. Marcus was closing up the garage at 10 in the evening when he heard something move near the chain-link fence at the back of the lot. A sound too deliberate to be an animal, too small to be an adult. He grabbed his flashlight and went to look. The car was a 1994 Buick that had been abandoned on the lot for 6 months, waiting on an owner who never came back. Marcus had been meaning to have it towed. He had not gotten around to it. He was grateful, later, that he had not. In the back seat, pressed against the far door, were 2 children. The girl was curled on her side on the seat cushion, her knees pulled to her chest, her breathing fast and shallow in the way that means fever. She was maybe 6 years old. The boy was sitting upright on the floor of the car, his back against the seat, with his arms stretched over the girl on the seat above him, not hugging her, but covering her. The way you cover something you are protecting from rain, which is what he was doing, because the back window had a crack that let the cold air in, and he had positioned himself between the crack and his sister. The boy looked up when the flashlight hit him. He did not flinch. He looked directly into the light with the flat, evaluating stare of a child who has learned to measure threats quickly. "We're not hurting anything," the boy said. His voice was steady for an 8-year-old. He had clearly said these words before, to other adults, and had learned that leading with this bought you a few extra seconds. Marcus crouched down so he was below the window, out of the rain, at the boy's eye level. "I can see that," he said. "What's wrong with her?" "She has a fever. She started getting sick this afternoon." A pause. "We left somewhere we weren't supposed to leave." "Where did you leave?" The boy looked at him for a long moment, calculating. "A house on Birchwood Road. We were staying there." Marcus knew Birchwood Road. He knew the house, in the general way that people in small towns know about things they have chosen not to look at too closely. The Hargrove house. He had heard things. Nothing specific enough to report. Nothing concrete enough to act on, just the kind of low-frequency wrong that settles into a community and gets absorbed. He reached for his phone. The boy watched him. "Are you calling to send us back?" the boy asked. Marcus stopped. "I'm calling someone to come look at your sister," he said. "If you call the county, they'll send us back." The boy said it the way you state a fact about weather. "They always send us back." Marcus looked at the girl. Her cheeks were flushed deep red, even in the cold. Her breathing had the wet, effortful quality of someone working harder than they should just to breathe. He put the phone back in his pocket. "Come on," he said. "Both of you. Inside." The boy did not move immediately. "Why?" "Because she needs to get warm, and you need to get dry." Marcus stood up and stepped back from the car, giving the boy space. "You can leave whenever you want. The door's right there." He walked back toward the garage without looking back. He heard, after a moment, the car door open. He did not have children's medicine. He had ibuprofen, which he looked up on his phone and determined was acceptable for a child her age and weight at a reduced dose. He did not have children's food. He had crackers, peanut butter, and canned soup. And the boy who said his name was Noah ate 2 bowls of soup, standing up at the workbench, because he did not sit down until he had confirmed that there was no one else in the building. Lily slept on the cot in the back room under 2 blankets and Marcus's winter coat. Her fever broke sometime around 2 in the morning. Noah sat on the floor next to the cot with his back against the wall. He did not sleep. When Marcus checked on them at 3, Noah's eyes were open. "You should rest," Marcus said. "I'm fine." Marcus leaned against the doorframe. "How long have you 2 been together in the system?" Noah considered whether to answer. 4 years, he said finally. "Since our mom left." "You keep ending up in the same placement?" "Not always. I keep finding her." He said it simply, without drama, as if this were just a logistical challenge he had learned to solve. Marcus looked at this boy, 8 years old, sitting on a concrete floor in a mechanic's garage at 3 in the morning, guarding his sick sister with the focused patience of someone who had been doing this for a very long time and felt something shift in his chest. Not sentimentality, something older and heavier than that. "Get some sleep," Marcus said. "I'll be in the front if anyone comes." In the morning, a social worker named Patricia Owens arrived. Marcus had called the county non-emergency line at 8 when he judged that Lily was stable enough for a conversation about next steps. Patricia was a tired woman in her 50s who had been doing this job for 23 years and had arrived at a place somewhere between realism and resignation. She assessed the situation, checked Lily's temperature, asked Noah a series of questions that he answered with careful brevity, and then stepped aside to speak with Marcus. "They'll be placed in temporary care while we sort out the Hargrove situation," she said. "I can't make any guarantees about where." "Can I apply for temporary guardianship?" Marcus asked. Patricia looked at him, the kind of look that is not unkind but is very honest. "You can apply," she said. "I won't lie to you about what that process will look like." "I know what it'll look like," Marcus said. "Tell me what I need to file." The next 6 months were the most documented period of Marcus Carter's life. Home inspections, financial audits, background checks that went back 20 years, interviews with neighbors, with customers, with the pastor of a church Marcus had attended twice and felt obligated to claim more familiarity with than he had. 3 neighbors on his street signed a letter questioning the appropriateness of his application. One of them, a retired school teacher named Gerald Mack, came to the garage personally to explain his concerns, which turned out to be less about Marcus's character specifically and more about what he called the optics of the situation for those children. Marcus listened to Gerald Mack for 8 minutes without interrupting. Then he said, "Mr. Mack, I appreciate you coming by. I've got a carburetor to finish." There were voices in Marcus's own community too. People who liked him, who were looking out for him, who told him plainly that he was aiming himself at a target. That the system would find a reason. That the best thing he could do for those kids was let them go to a family who did not have to fight so hard just to be allowed in the door. Marcus heard them. He understood what they were saying. He filed the paperwork anyway. What Marcus did not know at the time, the Hargrove house had financial ties to Harold Briggs, the largest garage owner in Clanton, a man with wide connections in the local court system. Harold had been a quiet engine in a network that had been running for years, routing state foster care money toward homes that asked no questions and filed no complaints. Marcus taking in Noah and Lily was not just a personal decision. It was an accidental disruption of an arrangement that depended on certain children remaining invisible. Harold noted it. He said nothing yet, but he filed it away. After 6 months of scrutiny, the court approved Marcus's guardianship application. The first night in the house, a 2-bedroom rental 4 blocks from the garage, the nicest place Marcus had lived in years. Lily fell asleep before 9 o'clock. Noah did not sleep. Marcus noticed the light under the door of the kids' room at 11. At midnight. At 1. At 1:15, he got up, walked down the hall, and sat down on the floor outside the door with his back against the wall. "Noah," he said quietly. A pause. Then, "Yeah. You okay in there?" "Yeah." Silence for a moment. Marcus could hear the boy breathing, a few feet away through the wall. "If you need to keep watch," Marcus said, "I'll keep watch out here." Another silence. Longer this time. "You don't have to do that," Noah said. "I know I don't have to." He stayed. At some point he dozed off sitting up, his head dropping forward. When he startled awake at 5:30, his neck ached, and the hallway was gray with early light. The door opened. Noah stood there in the oversized t-shirt Marcus had given him as pajamas, looking down at him. The boy's expression was complicated, not warm, not cold, somewhere in a territory Marcus did not quite have a name for yet. Marcus looked up at him. "Morning." Noah studied him for a moment longer. Then he stepped past him toward the kitchen, and over his shoulder he said, "I can make eggs if you have eggs." "I have eggs," Marcus said. He sat on the floor a moment longer, working the stiffness out of his neck, and thought, "Okay. All right. We can work with this." The town of Clanton, Alabama, had approximately 6,000 residents, and the self-awareness of a place that knew it was being left behind, but had not yet decided how to feel about that. There were 3 churches on Main Street, A diner that had been under the same family ownership since 1961, a dollar store that had replaced the hardware store, and a general understanding unspoken but widely shared of how things were supposed to look. Marcus Carter and his two white children did not look the way things were supposed to look. He understood this from the first week. He had grown up in Clanton, had gone to school here, had buried his wife and son in the cemetery on Route 12. He knew how the town's attention worked, slow to arrive, reluctant to leave. What he had not fully calculated was how exhausting it would be to perform competence every single day for an audience that had already decided on the verdict. At school, the first-grade teacher addressed her questions about Lily's lunch requirements to the woman standing behind Marcus in the pickup line, assuming she was the parent. At the pediatrician's office, the receptionist asked Marcus twice whether he was the guardian or the transportation. At the hardware store, a man Marcus had known since childhood looked at Noah and Lily walking beside him and said, with what he seemed to believe was a compliment, "Well, aren't you something?" Marcus smiled and kept walking every time. The harder moments were the ones he could not smile his way through. In the spring of that first year, Marcus attended a parent-teacher conference at the elementary school. He sat in the small plastic chair across the desk from Noah's teacher, a woman named Mrs. Phelps, who was professional and pleasant and slightly too careful with her words. The conference was fine. Noah was adjusting. His reading was strong. He had some difficulty with peer relationships, which was understandable given his background. Marcus nodded and took notes on a small notepad, because he had learned early that taking notes signaled seriousness in a way that just listening did not. On his way out, he passed the open door of the school library, where a group of parents had gathered for an informal meeting. He did not intend to stop, but he heard his name not spoken but implied, in the way a pronoun can carry a name, and he paused outside the door. A woman's voice. "I'm just saying someone should have asked more questions before this was approved." Another voice, lower, Patricia Owens, pushed it through. "You know how she is. Those children need stability. It's not about him personally." "Of course not." Marcus stood in the hallway for 3 seconds. Then he walked to his truck, drove to the garage, and spent 2 hours reorganizing a parts inventory that did not need reorganizing. That evening he made dinner, helped Noah with a book report, braided Lily's hair badly enough that she laughed and made him do it again, and did not mention what he had heard. Later, when both children were asleep, he sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and thought carefully about what it meant to raise children in a place that had not consented to them. He could leave. There were larger cities, places where a man raising 2 children who did not look like him would be unremarkable, or at least less remarkable. But Marcus had thought about this too. If everyone who found the town intolerable simply left, the town would belong entirely to the people who made it intolerable. He had buried Denise and James in the cemetery on Route 12. He was not leaving. He finished his coffee and went to bed. The school meeting incident repeated itself in various forms over the next several years, assembling into a texture of resistance that Marcus learned to navigate the way you learn to navigate a road with bad sections. You know where the rough patches are. You adjust your speed. You keep moving. He developed habits. He kept documentation. Every school record, every medical form, every permission slip, he kept copies in a folder, organized by date, because he had learned that when questions arose about his fitness as a parent, having the paper in hand was faster than arguing. He showed up early to everything. He introduced himself first. He also made a small number of allies over time, people who watched how he handled things and formed their own quiet opinions. Patricia Owens, the social worker, checked in periodically and stopped looking at him like a risk assessment. The librarian at the school, a retired teacher named Mr. Aldridge, who had known Marcus's mother, started saving Noah books he thought the boy would like and leaving them at the desk with a sticky note. These were small things. Marcus treated them as significant because in the economy of his situation, small things were what you had to work with. What he could not fully protect Noah and Lily from was each other's pain and his own. There were nights when Marcus sat in the garage after the children were asleep and asked himself, with the honest brutality that solitude permits, whether he was doing this for them or for himself. He loved them. He had been clear on that since the first morning he watched Noah make eggs with the careful concentration of a child who had learned that if you wanted things done right, you had to do them yourself. He loved them the way you love something that has reminded you that you are still capable of loving. But that love came with a cost he had not fully priced. Every time Noah came home from school, with a split lip from a fight over something someone said about his father, Marcus paid that cost. Every time Lily came home quiet and went straight to her room, Marcus paid it. He paid it without complaint and without showing it to them, because he believed the job of a parent was to absorb what you could and give your children the space to not have to carry it. What he did not yet understand was that this philosophy, taken too far, becomes a different kind of abandonment. The year Noah turned 17, the bill came due. It started with a fight at school, not the first, but the worst. A confrontation with 3 older boys that left Noah with a bruised cheekbone and a 3-day suspension. Marcus picked him up from the principal's office, drove home in silence, and waited. Noah held it together through dinner. He held it together through the dishes. He held it together until he was standing in the kitchen doorway, and then something gave way. "I'm so tired," he said. His voice was flat in a way that was worse than shouting. "I'm so tired of being the punchline, of being the experiment, of people looking at us and deciding what we are before we open our mouths." Marcus sat at the kitchen table. He did not try to fix it yet. He let Noah talk. "You've given up everything for us," Noah said, "and it doesn't even matter, because no matter what you do, no matter how many times you show up with your folder of papers they've already decided, you're already the wrong answer to them." "I know," Marcus said. "Then why?" Noah's voice cracked on the word. "Why don't you just let us be someone else's problem? We were always going to be someone's problem." Marcus was quiet for a moment. He looked at his hands on the table. "Get your jacket," he said. The cemetery on Route 12 was quiet in the early evening, the light going orange through the pine trees at the far edge. Marcus had not been here in 2 years. He stood in front of 2 headstones, Denise, Elaine Carter, and James Marcus Carter, 2 years old, and let the silence sit before he started talking. He told Noah everything. Not the edited version, not the version calibrated to be manageable, all of it. The Friday evening shift, the police officer who came to the garage, the apartment he stopped going home to, the 3 years of efficient, disciplined, well-maintained, falling apart, the night he found Noah and Lily in the back of a dead man's abandoned Buick, and how it was the first time in 3 years that something outside of him had felt more urgent than the noise inside. "I didn't take you in to fill a hole," Marcus said. He was looking at Denise's headstone, not at Noah. "I took you in because you were in trouble, and I was in a position to help, and because he stopped. Because watching you cover Lily with your arms in that cold car was the first thing in 3 years that made me feel like I was supposed to still be here." He turned to look at Noah. "You are not someone's problem. You are not an experiment. You are my son." He said it plainly, without theater. "And I know this town, and I know what they do with people like us. I know it costs you. I know it costs Lily. And I would understand. I mean it. I would genuinely understand if you told me you wanted a different life. But I will never stop believing that you are worth every single thing this has cost." Noah looked at him for a long time. The orange light moved through the pine trees. "I want to go to law school," Noah said finally. It came out a little like a confession and a little like a decision. "I want to do what you did, but with the parts of the system you couldn't reach." They drove home, mostly in silence. But it was a different kind of silence than the drive. They're not the silence of things unsaid, but the silence of things that had been said and were now settling. Lily's moment came 2 years later, on a Thursday evening in March, during the spring concert at Clanton Middle School. She was 15. She had her father's talent for holding things together and her own form of exhaustion, not the exhaustion of fighting, but the exhaustion of perpetual explanation, of being looked at as a question that required an answer. That evening, backstage before the concert, a girl from her class named Brittany looked through the curtain at the audience and said, with the thoughtless cruelty of someone who did not understand they were being cruel, "Lily, who's the black man in the front row?" There were 4 other girls standing there. They were all looking at Lily. Lily felt the moment, the weight of every teasing comment and pointed question of the past 9 years, and she made the wrong choice. "He used to work for our family," she said. "Odd jobs and stuff." The moment the words were out, she knew. She performed that evening with the quality of someone who is physically present and mentally somewhere else entirely. She sang her part. She smiled when she was supposed to smile. And the whole time, in the corner of her awareness, she was tracking the empty seat in the front row, the seat that had been occupied when she looked through the curtain before the show, and was not occupied when she walked on stage. Marcus had heard. He had left before she could see his face change. She found him that night in the garage. He was sitting on the stool at the workbench with an old clock in his hands, a wind-up mantel clock that had stopped working years ago. He was taking it apart with the focused, methodical attention of someone who needed something to do with their hands. He looked up when she came in, and his expression was careful in the way that told her he had made a decision about what his expression was going to be. "I'm sorry," she said. She had been rehearsing the words since she walked off the stage, and they came out small and insufficient. Marcus set the clock down. "I'm not angry at you," he said. "Scared is okay. Tired is okay. I have been both of those things many times in my life." He looked at her directly. "What I'm afraid of, not for tonight, but in general, is that you'll get so used to letting fear do the talking that you stop being able to hear what you actually think." Lily sat down on the old bench against the wall. The garage smelled like motor oil and cold metal, and, faintly, the coffee Marcus always left on the warmer too long. "I'm sorry," she said again. This time, it meant more. "I know," Marcus said. He picked the clock back up and went back to taking it apart. She stayed with him in the garage for another hour, mostly in silence, watching him work. He did not need her to perform recovery. He just needed her to stay. The following week, in her English class, Lily stood at the front of the room and said, "The most courageous person I know is my father. His name is Marcus Carter. He taught me that staying is a choice you make every day, not once." She got a B+ on the presentation because the teacher felt she could have expanded more on her examples. Lily did not mind. She had said the thing that needed to be said, in front of the people who needed to hear it, and that was what mattered. Marcus, when she told him, was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "B+ is good." What did she want more of? Specific examples. "You should have mentioned the folder," he said. "That folder is very compelling." Lily laughed a real laugh, unguarded, and Marcus smiled, and the particular damage of the spring concert night was not erased but was absorbed, added to the sediment of things they had been through, and were still standing after. The years moved in the way years move when you are paying attention to the days, instead of the distance, slowly while you are in them, then suddenly very far behind you. Noah graduated from the University of Alabama School of Law 9 years after the conversation in the cemetery. He had been a focused, driven student who finished his undergraduate degree in 3 years and moved straight into law school, driven by the memory of a man with a folder of documents and the patience to rebuild a life one documented proof at a time. He passed the bar on his first attempt. He took a position with a non-profit criminal defense organization in Birmingham and spent 7 years building a practice around wrongful conviction cases, clients who were poor, who were unrepresented, who had been processed through a system that treated efficiency as a higher value than accuracy. Lily went to journalism school at Auburn, graduated, and spent 2 years at a regional newspaper before moving to an investigative nonprofit that covered systemic failures in child welfare and criminal justice. She was methodical and relentless, with an instinct for the kind of story where the official version and the true version had been separated by a document someone had hoped would never surface. She had been working for 3 years on a series about irregularities in Alabama's foster care system, specifically a cluster of licensed homes in Shelby and Chilton counties where state funding had flowed for years to homes with documented complaint histories. The name Harold Briggs appeared in 2 of her cross-referenced files. She recognized it distantly, the way you recognize the names of adults from childhood, spoken in lowered voices. She had not yet understood how close the story was to home. Marcus stayed in Clanton. He called Noah and Lily on Sundays. He kept the garage running. He turned down 2 offers to buy the property from a developer accumulating parcels on the east side of town. He went to the cemetery on the anniversary of the accident, and on James's birthday, and sometimes on no occasion at all. He did not tell Noah and Lily about Harold Briggs coming to see him. The first visit had been on a Tuesday afternoon, 18 months before the trial. Harold Briggs was 63 years old, overweight, with the complexion of a man who had spent decades indoors under bad lighting making decisions that cost other people more than they cost him. He arrived at the garage unannounced and stood in the bay door with the expression of a man who had rehearsed what he was going to say and had lost confidence in the rehearsal. "I need to talk to you about something," Harold said. "About those kids you took in, Noah and the girl." Marcus set down his wrench. "What about them?" "There's some history I think you should know. About how their files were handled. About some things that happened in the system." Harold stopped. He looked around the garage as if checking for an audience. "There are people who are not going to be happy if this comes out." "Are my kids in danger?" Marcus asked. His voice was level. "Not currently. This is about the past. About what was done to them and covered up." Harold paused. "I was part of it. I want to be clear about that. I'm not coming to you as a clean man." Marcus looked at him for a long moment. "Then why are you coming to me at all?" "Because your son is a lawyer. Because I think he can do something with what I have." Harold met his eyes. "And because I have a debt I've been putting off paying for a long time. I've already given a copy of the documents to my personal attorney, with instructions to release them if anything happens to me. But I want to hand the originals to you directly, so Noah has everything." Marcus told Harold to come back when he had the documents ready. Harold came back once more, 6 weeks later, nervous in a way he had not been the first time, and said he was still finalizing things and that Marcus should be patient. 3 weeks after that, Harold Briggs was found dead in his office. A single gunshot wound. The Clanton Police Department opened a homicide investigation. Marcus's fingerprints were on the safe in Harold's office. Marcus had been seen, by one witness, leaving the vicinity of Harold's property on the night of the murder. Marcus had a documented history of conflict with Harold over Harold's use of underage workers at his equipment yard. Marcus did not go to the police with what he knew. He told himself it was because Harold had never given him the documents, and his account of 2 private conversations would be dismissed as self-serving. He told himself it was because dragging Noah and Lily into this would reopen everything he had spent 20 years helping them move past. But in the quietest part of himself, he also knew something else. He had been absorbing things on his own for so long that he no longer remembered how to ask for help. He had turned self-sufficiency into something close to a religion, and now he was about to lose everything because of it. The indictment came on a gray morning in late October. Marcus was in the garage when the police arrived. He locked the side door. He turned off the coffee maker. He went outside to meet them. Noah found out from a news alert on a Tuesday morning while preparing for a sentencing hearing in Birmingham. Clanton man charged in Briggs homicide. Marcus Carter, 57, indicted on first-degree murder. He read it 3 times. Then he called Lily. She had already seen it. She had seen it 40 minutes earlier and had been sitting at her desk with her phone in her hand, looking at a folder on her computer screen, a folder she had been building for 2 years, which contained the name Harold Briggs in 11 separate documents, and which had just shifted from an investigative project into something else entirely. "He didn't call us," Noah said. "No," Lily said. A silence on the line. "He was protecting us," Lily said. "You know that's what he was doing." "I know." Noah's voice was controlled in the way it got when he was working to keep it that way. "That's the part that makes me want to drive to Clanton right now." "We are driving to Clanton," Lily said. "We're just stopping at my office first." They tried to visit Marcus at the county jail. He refused. He sent a message through the corrections officer. "I have a lawyer. Do not come to the trial. This does not involve you." Noah stood in the jail parking lot and looked at his phone. Then he got back in the car and drove to Lily's temporary workspace, a rented desk at a copy shop in Clanton, where she had already spread documents across 2 folding tables and was on the phone with a records contact in Montgomery. "He said not to come," Noah said. "I heard you," Lily said, not looking up. "Hand me that manila folder." It took them 9 days to build what they needed. The network had 3 principals: Harold Briggs, who had provided financial backing and community cover; Dorothy Walsh, a former social worker who had processed placements at the Hargrove home, and a dozen others, managing the paperwork that kept complaints from becoming investigations; and a retired local judge named Carl Purcell, who had signed off on placements for 15 years with a pattern of decisions that only became visible when laid against the financial records. The system worked simply. Homes were licensed, children were placed, state money flowed, complaints were absorbed and redirected, and anyone who might make trouble was managed through paperwork that made them look unreliable. Noah and Lily's original files had been altered. Lily found evidence that the originals had existed and been replaced in a storage archive partially digitized by a junior clerk in the county records office who had not known what she was digitizing. The altered files made Noah and Lily look like routine placements. The originals, reconstructible from intake records and cross-referenced medical reports, told a different story, one that raised questions about the Hargrove placement that should have triggered a formal review and never did. Marcus, 21 years ago, had removed 2 children from a house connected to this network. He had been a loose end ever since. When Harold Briggs decided to settle accounts with his conscience, Marcus was the person he had chosen to go through. When Harold died before completing the transfer, Marcus became not just a loose end, but a convenient frame. On the morning of the 10th day, Noah filed a motion to substitute as counsel of record. Marcus refused to sign for 6 hours. Then, in the late afternoon, he signed persuaded, in the end, by Preston, his court-appointed attorney, who had looked at Noah's credentials and then looked at his own and quietly told his client that there was no version of this where Marcus's best interests were served by pride. The morning of the 4th day of trial, Marcus was already seated at the defense table when Noah and Lily came through the back door. The prosecution had spent 3 days building its case with the confidence of a team that believed it had already won. The physical evidence, fingerprints on the safe, witness testimony placing Marcus at the scene, no verifiable alibi. The character evidence, documented confrontations with Harold over labor practices, the complaints filed during the guardianship proceedings, years of what the prosecutor called antagonistic engagement with the established community. The prosecutor, a woman named Diane Ellsworth, who had a county conviction rate of 81%, had saved her most effective move for the end of her case. Dorothy Walsh, whose testimony was delivered with the measured sorrow of a public servant who had known Marcus Carter for years and had always hoped she was wrong about him. Dorothy Walsh was 64 years old, small, with white hair and reading glasses on a chain around her neck. She had the manner of a woman who had spent decades being trusted, and she wore it as naturally as her cardigan. She testified that she had been driving past Harold's property on the night in question and had seen Marcus's truck parked at the side entrance. She had thought nothing of it at the time, she said. Marcus and Harold knew each other. She had not connected it to anything until she heard the news. She testified with composure that was nearly perfect. She looked at the jury when she answered questions. She expressed, at the appropriate moment, something that resembled grief. The jury watched her with the attentive sympathy of people being told a story that confirmed what they already suspected. Noah waited until the prosecution had fully rested before he made his first move. He had learned, over 7 years of wrongful conviction work, that juries are suspicious of dramatic reversals. They read them as tricks. What juries respond to is the slow, patient disclosure of something hidden, revealed piece by piece until the shape of it becomes undeniable. He started with the fingerprints. Your Honor, I would like to introduce Defense Exhibit A, a service receipt dated 7 days prior to the death of Harold Briggs, documenting a lock repair performed by Marcus Carter at the request of Mr. Briggs, specifically on the combination mechanism of the office safe. The receipt had been recovered from a backup file maintained by Harold's accounting firm, a routine digital archive that the investigation had not requested because the investigation had not been looking for it. Noah had requested it. The accounting firm, contacted directly, had produced it within 48 hours. The receipt was clean, time-stamped, and bore Harold Briggs's signature. It was entered into evidence. Next, Noah called a digital forensics specialist named Raymond Chu, who explained to the jury that the deletion of the relevant camera footage had not been accidental. It had been deliberate, executed with software tools that required administrative access to the city's traffic monitoring system. And in your expert assessment, Noah asked, would Marcus Carter, a self-employed auto mechanic, have had the technical knowledge or system access to perform this deletion? No, Raymond Chu said. This required credentials and tools specific to municipal infrastructure management. And in your review of the access logs for the relevant time period, Did you identify whose credentials were used? The deletion was performed under a guest account created and used only once. The account was created from an IP address registered to a county government office. Which office? Raymond Chu looked at his notes. The Department of Children and Family Services. The gallery shifted. Not loudly a murmur, a repositioning, the sound of attention changing quality. Noah looked at the jury and said nothing for a moment. Then, no further questions. Lily was called as a witness in the afternoon session, not as a family member, but as an investigative journalist presenting findings from a 2-year independent investigation directly relevant to the case. She sat in the witness box with her hands folded on the rail and spoke to the jury as if she were explaining something important to people she trusted to understand it. She laid out the structure of the network, the 3 principles, the financial flows, the pattern of placement decisions, and complaint suppressions. She was precise, documented, and did not editorialize, which made everything she said more effective than editorializing would have been. Then Noah asked, "Miss Carter, in the course of your investigation, did you encounter documentation relating specifically to you and your brother?" "Yes." "Can you describe what you found?" "I found 2 versions of our placement records," Lily said. "The version currently in the county archive, which reflects a routine foster care history, and evidence of the original intake documentation, which records complaints and medical observations that were not carried forward into the official file." "What do those original records indicate?" "They indicate that complaints were made about the Hargrove placement, the home where my brother and I were living before Marcus Carter found us, and that those complaints were received and not acted upon. The decision not to act was made by the caseworker assigned to our file." She paused. That caseworker was Dorothy Walsh. The silence in the courtroom was complete. "Miss Carter," Noah said, his voice even, "do you believe your presence here today reflects an objective assessment of the evidence, or loyalty to your father?" It was the question the prosecution would ask on cross. Noah asked it first. Lily looked at the jury. "I have been working on this investigation for 2 years," she said. "I started it because I found irregularities in public records. I continued it because the irregularities led to a pattern. I am presenting it here because the pattern leads directly to the framing of an innocent man." A pause. "The fact that the innocent man is my father does not make the evidence less true. It makes it more important." Dorothy Walsh was recalled to the stand the following morning. She had rearranged something in her face overnight. The composure was still there, but underneath it was a watchfulness that had not been visible before. Noah approached the stand with a single legal pad and a manila folder. "Mrs. Walsh," he said, "you testified that you drove past Harold Briggs's property on the night of the murder and observed Marcus Carter's truck. At what time?" "Around 9:15 in the evening." "You were driving past Harold Briggs's property at 9:15 on a Tuesday evening. Where were you coming from?" A slight pause. "I had been visiting a friend." Noah noted the friend's name and moved on. "You heard Raymond Chu's testimony yesterday regarding the camera deletion being traced to a County Department of Children and Family Services account. Did that testimony surprise you?" "Everything about this case has been." "Did that specific detail surprise you?" "Ah, yes." "Were you aware, prior to Mr. Chu's testimony, that the deletion had been traced to a Department of Children and Family Services account?" "No, you were not." Noah opened his folder. "I would like to direct your attention to Defense Exhibit F, a communication log from the Clanton Police Department, showing that on the morning following the discovery of Harold Briggs's body, you called the detective leading the investigation. The call lasted 14 minutes. I knew Harold. I wanted to know. In that call, you mentioned that the camera on the corner of Sycamore and 2nd may have captured relevant footage." Noah looked up from the folder. "The camera on the corner of Sycamore and 2nd is not visible from Harold Briggs's property. It is not a camera that would obviously occur to someone who was simply a concerned acquaintance. How did you know about that camera?" Dorothy Walsh's hands shifted slightly on the rail. "I'm familiar with the area," she said. "You suggested a specific camera to a detective on the morning after a murder, before any public information about the investigation had been released." Noah let the sentence sit. "And that specific camera's footage was subsequently deleted from a Department of Children and Family Services account." Another pause. Mrs. Walsh, do you have administrative access to the county traffic monitoring system? Her attorney objected on self-incrimination grounds. The objection was sustained. Dorothy Walsh declined to answer. Noah moved to the final element. Your Honor, at this time, I would like to introduce Defense Exhibit G, an audio recording recovered from a password-protected file on Harold Briggs's personal cloud storage account, produced pursuant to subpoena. The prosecutor objected. There were 20 minutes of arguments at the bench, a recess, and a review of subpoena documentation. During the recess, Dorothy Walsh's attorney spoke urgently with her in the back corner of the gallery. She sat very still and looked at her hands. The recording was admitted. Noah played it from a speaker near the jury box. Harold Briggs had recorded it on a phone, in what sounded like a parked car, speaking in the lowered voice of a man afraid of being overheard. Harold's voice filled the courtroom. I have been part of something for a long time that I should have walked away from a long time ago. I am making this record because I do not trust that I am going to get the chance to say this in person. The records relating to the placement of the two children, Noah and the girl, were altered after Carter took them in. The original intake forms documented injuries and complaints that would have triggered a review of the Hargrove home. That review did not happen because Dorothy Walsh made sure it did not happen, because a review would have led back to the arrangement she and I had been running for years. I asked Walsh to let it go. She told me, if I give anything to Carter, she will make sure there is nothing left of me to give anything to anyone. I am giving this to my lawyer with instructions to produce it if anything happens to me. I want Marcus Carter to know that what he did for those children was the right thing. And I want it on the record that the right thing nearly destroyed him because of what we did. I am sorry. I know that does not fix anything, but I am sorry. The recording ended. The courtroom was silent for several seconds. Noah looked at Dorothy Walsh. Dorothy Walsh looked at the floor. No further questions, Noah said. Diane Ellsworth did not deliver a rebuttal closing. She conferred with her team for 40 minutes during the recess, and when court resumed, she addressed the judge in a tone that had shed its previous confidence entirely. Your Honor, in light of the evidence presented by the defense, the people are requesting a brief continuance to review certain investigative materials. The people's case is concluded, Judge Harlan said. Closing arguments will proceed as scheduled. Noah's closing was 11 minutes long. He did not raise his voice. He did not appeal to sympathy. He laid out the sequence of facts, the legitimate fingerprints, the deliberate camera deletion, the witness with impossible knowledge, and a documented financial relationship with the murder victim, the recorded statement of a dead man, and he described Marcus Carter in one sentence. This is a man who spent 21 years doing the quiet, unglamorous, costly work of keeping his word, and who was targeted for it by people who understood that his silence, his poverty, and his isolation made him the perfect person to blame. He sat down. The jury deliberated for 1 hour and 47 minutes. The foreperson stood and read the verdict in a clear voice. Not guilty. Marcus sat at the defense table and did not move for a long moment. The gallery behind him was noise, some approval, some the grinding surprise of people whose expectations had been confounded. His hands were flat on the table. Noah put his hand on his father's shoulder. Marcus looked down at his own hands, the hands that had rebuilt 100 engines, that had braided a little girl's hair badly enough to make her laugh, that had pressed flat against a hallway floor on the first night 2 frightened children came home, because a boy needed to know that the person on the other side of the door was not going anywhere. His shoulders moved once. He pressed his fist against his mouth and held it there, and Noah kept his hand on his shoulder, and neither of them said anything, and that was exactly the right thing to do. Lily, sitting in the gallery, watched her father cry for the first time in her life. She did not look away. Judge Harlan ordered a full review of the investigative file and referred the matter to the state attorney general. Dorothy Walsh was taken into custody the following morning, charged with obstruction, evidence tampering, and conspiracy. The investigation into Carl Purcell, the retired judge whose rulings had enabled the network for 15 years, was opened within the week. The Hargrove home license, which had somehow still been active under a different operator, was revoked. It was not clean. These things are never clean. The people who had built the network had spent decades making it difficult to trace, and the tracing took time, and not every thread led somewhere that the law could reach. Some of the damage to the children who had passed through those homes over 15 years, to the families that had never gotten answers, was not the kind of damage that a verdict or a policy change can fully address. Marcus understood this. He had always understood, in the way of someone who had been on the receiving end of systems, rather than the designing end, that justice and repair are not the same thing. What he focused on, in the days after the verdict, was the smaller and more manageable question of what came next. 3 days after the trial ended, Marcus, Noah, and Lily sat in the garage on Mercer Road. Same garage, same oil-stained concrete, same pegboard of wrenches in order of size. Marcus had made coffee. Lily was sitting on the old bench against the wall. Noah was standing with his back against the workbench, sleeves rolled up. "You should have called us," Noah said. Not angry past anger now, into something more honest. "I know," Marcus said, "when Harold first came to you. That was the moment." "I know. You keep doing that," Lily said. "You keep deciding what we can handle without asking us." Marcus looked at his coffee cup. "Old habit. It almost got you life in prison," Noah said. "I know that too." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "I've spent a long time thinking the way to protect people is to stand between them and the hard thing. I didn't." He stopped, started again. "I didn't know how to let you stand next to me instead." Lily crossed the garage and sat down beside him on the work stool. It was too small for 2 people. She sat on the edge of it anyway. "We've been standing next to you our whole lives," she said. "We just needed you to look." Marcus looked at her. Then, at Noah. He nodded slowly, the nod of a man integrating something he had understood intellectually for a long time, but was only now absorbing at the level that changes behavior. "All right," he said. "All right." They sat in the garage for another 2 hours, drinking coffee that got cold and then reheated, talking about the things that had accumulated over 21 years of weekly phone calls and careful silences, things Marcus had wondered about and not asked, things Noah and Lily had wanted to say and had decided to save for a better moment, which this was. In the months that followed, the garage on Mercer Road was renovated. Not dramatically. Marcus was not a man for dramatic gestures. The storage room in the back became an office. A used couch appeared against one wall. A bulletin board went up with information about foster care, legal resources, and family support programs in the county. Marcus applied for nonprofit status for what he called, without much ceremony, the Carter Family Resource Center. Noah established a pro bono legal clinic operating out of Birmingham, but taking cases statewide. In its first year, it took on 14 cases of potential wrongful conviction and won 3 reversals. The work was slow and expensive and necessary, and Noah did it with the patient focus of someone trained by watching a man spend 6 months assembling a guardianship folder, one document at a time. Lily's series on the foster care network ran in 6 installments and was picked up by 2 national outlets. It prompted a state legislative review, the audit of 47 licensed homes, and the revision of complaint processing procedures that had been unchanged since 1989. It won a regional journalism award. She accepted it by video call because she was in the middle of reporting a follow-up piece and could not travel. She called Marcus afterward. He asked what the follow-up piece was about. She told him. He asked the right questions. She had always noticed that about him, that he asked the right questions. In the same way, he had always known which wrench to reach for, without looking at the board. She stayed on the phone with him for an hour, longer than their usual Sunday calls, and when she finally said goodnight, she sat for a moment in the quiet of her apartment and thought about a garage that smelled like motor oil and cold metal and coffee left too long on the warmer, and felt, the way you feel things you have always known but sometimes need to be reminded of, that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. On a Saturday morning, in early spring, Marcus arrived at the garage before anyone else. He unlocked the door, turned on the lights, started the coffee maker. He stood in the middle of the space and looked at what it had become, the bulletin board, the couch, the stack of legal resource pamphlets Noah had printed, the drawing that a 7-year-old girl had made during a drop-in visit last week and left taped to the wall, a house with a green door, and 4 stick figures of varying heights standing in front of it. He looked at the drawing for a while. Then he noticed, On the wall near the old workbench, a photograph in a simple frame. He walked over to look at it. It showed a hallway, poorly lit, with a closed door on one side. On the floor outside the door, a man was sitting with his back against the wall, his legs stretched out, his head dropped slightly forward in sleep. The light under the door was on. He stood in front of it for a long moment. He knew now that Noah had taken it. Noah, who had been awake that whole long first night, who had cracked the door open at 5:30 and found Marcus still there. Noah, who had become a man who collected evidence of the things worth saving. The man in the photograph was 36 years old. He had lost everything he had built his life around, and he had chosen not once, but every day, in every ordinary moment, to build something again. He had not known, sitting on that hallway floor 21 years ago, whether it would hold. He had been afraid of exactly that uncertainty every day for 21 years. He looked at the photograph, the light under the door, the man who had decided to stay. He thought about Denise, who would have known exactly what to say in this moment and would have said it with the directness he had loved about her and missed every single day. He thought, I could not save you. I will always wish I could have saved you, and I am still here, and there is still work to do, and I am going to do it. He turned away from the photograph. He poured his coffee. He unlocked the front door and flipped the sign in the window. Outside, a car pulled into the lot. A woman got out, then reached back to unbuckle a child from the back seat. A girl, maybe 4 years old, who stood next to her mother and looked at the garage with the wide, careful eyes of a child being taken somewhere new. Marcus walked to the door and held it open. Come on in, he said. Coffee's on. The woman nodded and took her daughter's hand, and they walked inside into the light and the smell of coffee and motor oil and the warmth of a place where someone had decided, a long time ago, that staying was worth it. The same place where 2 frightened children had once been given soup and blankets and the simplest possible promise that this time, the person on the other side of the door was not going anywhere. Some promises take a lifetime to keep. Marcus Carter had kept his, and in the end, the children he had stayed for came back and stayed for him, not because they owed a debt, but because that is what it means to be a family. Not blood, not paperwork, not the approval of a town that had never wanted to understand them. Just people who chose to stay, again and again, for as long as it took,